Good evening and welcome to WPSU's Vote 18. Over the next 3 weeks, we'll talk with the candidates running for the U.S. House to represent Pennsylvania's 12th, 13th, and 15th congressional districts. We begin with the race for the 15th district. Two candidates are vying for the position, Republican Glenn Thompson, the incumbent, and Democrat Susan Boser. We'll be hearing from both candidates, beginning with Susan Boser. Welcome to WPSU's Vote 18 Race for the 15th District. Today we're talking with Susan Boser, the Democratic candidate in Pennsylvania's new 15th District. Boser is a professor of sociology at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Before that, she worked for 20 years in human services, including in drug and rehabilitation programs. Susan Boser, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be here.
You've talked about your experience in work and as a professor as a real asset that you would bring to this job. Can you give a specific example of work you've done either in local government or social policy that you think adds to your qualifications?
Oh my, there are so many. It's actually the harder thing is knowing where to pick. Most recently, I have been working in my own home county, Indiana County, with the Indiana County Sustainable Economic Development Task Force. Been doing that for over a year. And what we did is it was commissioned by the commissioners. I was asked to help design and also facilitate a group specifically looking at opportunities for renewable energy. And you can read about renewable energy and you can get some ideas, but it's nowhere near as powerful and also directly applied as when you're bringing people into the room who represent different stakeholder communities in your own county. We had, for example, folks who had been doing work and research in solar energy for a long time. Somebody else who's affiliated with the university and has an opportunity for a small business incubator. We had somebody who was an attorney and worked with R&P coal for a number of years and presented as a skeptic. So lots of different perspectives, a little bit of conflict at times, but we surfaced ideas and crafted them specifically for Indiana County. And that gives me a completely different understanding than if it was just something out of a book.
Do you think those types of experiences compensate for your lack of having held office?
I got to tell you, I think the fact that I haven't held office before is proving to be an advantage. I hadn't seen it as such when I first got started, but when I'm talking with people in the field, what I'm hearing from them is the fact that I am not a politician. I'm a first-time politician, and I'm also not taking any corporate money, is leaving me a very attractive candidate compared to people who are establishment politicians with long histories of not as much results, but taking a whole lot of donor money from corporations. So that aspect actually is an advantage I hadn't anticipated. But the other aspect is that, quite honestly, 20 years in human services left me on the ground in people's homes, seeing the reality of how the system works for people and how entrenched the poverty is. And it leaves me less willing to see the people in terms of some of the stereotypes, but recognize they're really working very hard, they're doing the best they can, and there are reasons for a number of the choices that they're making.
You said that you became interested in politics more so after President Trump was elected. You participated in the Women's March in Washington, D.C., and identify yourself as someone who is opposed to President Trump. But the district you represent is a very red district. Do you think you're a good fit for that?
Actually, I'm going to take exception to the characterization of me identifying as someone who's opposed to Trump. I'm not running against him. And I don't talk about him at all in the field. I'm running against somebody who is also from this district and who has 10 years in as a politician and made certain choices for policies that, in my opinion, don't serve the area very well and are not well informed by that are, in my opinion, much more informed by the donations that he gets. And so I see myself as an excellent fit for this district because this is what I am from. I am small town, I am rural, I come from working class roots. I have lived my whole life in this region, and I think that those are particular assets right now, and I think I'm an outstanding fit.
In one of your promotional videos for your campaign, the narrator says that you're running because, quote, both parties in Washington are holding us back. It wasn't surprising to hear that said about the Republican Party. You're running as a Democrat.
But what the heck am I saying about the Democrats? Huh?
Exactly.
Again, what it comes back down to is that establishment politics and establishment politicians, I think on both sides, have been heavily informed by large moneyed corporate interests. I think there have been good policies, for example, the Affordable Care Act that was passed, but quite honestly, even the Affordable Care Act was still a huge compromise. It left millions of people still without insurance. It still left us utilizing a private insurance system. It still left us paying full price with pharmaceuticals rather than negotiating, when we know from experience and looking across other industrialized nations that single-payer systems in countries like Japan and Germany and France and the UK and Canada, among many others, cost less than half of what we're paying here and get much, much better outcomes than what we're getting. So the Affordable Care Act was compromised, and I recognize they did what they needed to do with it. And if elected, I would still put an effort towards shoring that up, but I think we absolutely have to move to some kind of a single-payer system. They're using the phrase Medicare for all, and that's one option. I think we need to look at what's been working in a number of different places, though, and craft something based on those years of experience that's going to be right and uniquely American. And I don't think it involves investing in private insurance that's employer-based, and I don't think that it involves paying full price for pharmaceuticals.
Do you think it would be politically feasible to go that direction, though, Medicare for all? I'm sure you're aware of all the difficulty it took in getting the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, passed.
And the reason that it took, I think, why it had so much difficulty is that it had to do with, again, the high role of big corporate money. That it's playing. I mean, insurance companies and pharmaceuticals, the kinds of donations that they're making and how much they're investing in Congress. They're getting the best government money can buy. And I don't think that's necessarily serving the people well.
Aside from health care, how else do you see Democrats as holding the party back?
I think that when you go back to the late 90s and the changes that were made to in the creation of the Personal Work and Responsibility Act, now creating TANF, the system that we have now, it bought into stereotypes about who the people were that were receiving benefits. And I think I'm surprised that that happened on a Democratic watch.
Under President Bill Clinton.
Yeah, I think that sold people out.
One of the themes of your candidacy is that rural areas are at risk of being left behind.
Yes.
And you've pointed to high-speed broadband internet access as an important first step in helping address that. If you were elected, how would you envision that happening?
I think that there's some very clear mechanisms for it, and frankly, I'd look at the same kind of route that we took with electrification in the 1930s. That was a combination of political will and setting aside political money from the congressional level, federal level, but instead of working with the giant telecoms, which are barriers right now to providing access in rural areas, I believe we should be working through the rural cooperatives. Like in my area, it's REA, which is more than poised to move forward with laying the fiber optic lines. There are 4 rural cooperatives that probably cover about 3/4 of this huge, beautiful 15th district, and I think that's the route that you want to go to get it done.
And you've spoken about the need for more economic opportunity in the area, but the recent released figures on unemployment in Pennsylvania are at 3.9%. That's an 18-year low. That sounds like things are going in the right direction.
Okay, first of all, that's the rates for Pennsylvania, and that's not county specific. I would charge anybody with looking specifically at what the rates are by county.
They've been coming down, though, too. Indiana County, for example, is down to about 5.5% last year, and that's much lower than it had been the year before.
And still above the state average, I would point out, number one. But number two, the other challenge with this, and the bigger challenge with this, is that while that accounts for numbers of people employed or no longer seeking employment, okay, so it's not exactly people without work, But what it doesn't speak to is the amount of money that they're able to make. You take people, for example, that maybe worked in coal mines and were bringing home $55,000 a year, solid benefits, able to take care of their family, able to look forward to a secure retirement. And those same people now are driving 40 miles to work part-time in a Walmart, you know, and maybe making just a little bit over minimum wage. You're not seeing that people have the incomes that are sufficient to sustain themselves, and that's what the problem is. It's poverty.
What do you think Congress should be doing to address that, aside from broadband?
Okay, well, broadband is a huge part of it because it's going to make us competitive in a lot of ways in terms of attracting industry, allowing educational opportunities, so I think all of that is necessary. In addition to that, though, I think a huge part of it, frankly, is infrastructure development. We've had people in Congress or seeking to be in Congress talking for a long time about the need for infrastructure development, but man, you haven't seen a penny of it released yet, and that's got to be a priority. We have to have roadways that are broad and bridges that are secured. It would not be possible for corporations to locate businesses right now just because of the difficulty getting there. One good example is in northern Cambria County, when it became evident actually as early as the late 50s that there was going to be a decline in jobs available for coal miners. There were a group of individuals that formed a local nonprofit for the purpose of attracting business, economic development. Their name is HAIDA, H-A-I-D-A, okay? All volunteers, and now they're quite elderly. They looked at me and said, "Oh, someone young." But at any rate, they have a business industrial park on the edge of the community. They have created a small hospital, the only one in the region that treats black lung disease. They have created 3 or 4 other businesses, but they have been stymied from bringing more because there is a 2-mile stretch from Route 36. And they have applied twice to their sitting congressman for the $2 million it would cost to bring that bridge in. And they haven't gotten it. And they've been waiting years. $2 million to put that bridge and that road in. Those are things that we could do. But furthermore, one other thing that I would point out is that I think a huge detriment for us is that the small business economy has been greatly harmed, in part by the Walmartization, if you will, the large corporations that are dominating the economy in a lot of ways. Dairy industry is a perfect example of that. Some 79 dairy farms that all had the same contract with Dean's Foods out of Texas lost the contract when Dean said no because they lost Walmart. But those kinds of things, so we create opportunities for small businesses through low-cost loans, low-cost access to capital, through addressing the regulation, and then finally through antitrust legislation as well. The
Farm Bill that's under negotiation right now, different versions passed by the House and Senate, and this is a huge piece of legislation, and part of what it includes is the SNAP program or food stamps. The House version includes stiffer working requirements, and your Republican opponent, Glenn Thompson, supports those working requirements. You've called them an attack on impoverished families.
Absolutely.
Why don't you think it's reasonable to say, okay, if you're getting this assistance, we want to help get you back into job, either through training or stiffer job requirements?
Well, for the first part, it assumes that the people who are receiving SNAP are people who aren't working. And take a look at some of the numbers. What you're going to find is that SNAP is actually subsidizing companies like Walmart. It's subsidizing to a significant extent families who are in the military because the wages are so low that although they're working full time, they still qualify for SNAP. Okay? So it's not about making people work that just simply don't feel like it. These are people who are working their tails off and not making enough money because the wages are so low. And all it's doing, so one would say, all right, well, they're already doing that. What's the big deal? The big deal is that now they have to start this long bureaucratic paperwork process to prove that they're actually working and maintain that on a regular basis. And the steps, humiliating and denigrating steps that people have to go through to prove that they're not lazy and living off the dole. It is based on stereotypes about the people, and this is exactly why someone who is from this district, who knows what it's like to struggle, who knows what it's like to not be sure I can get my electric bill paid at the end of the month, okay, is a better choice.
We asked our listeners and viewers of WPSU for questions, and we received this question from Jennifer in the State College area. Okay. Where do you stand on marijuana legalization?
I support it.
across the board?
I do, actually. Not just for medical, but for, I think that marijuana use should be both licensed and regulated. I think there is potential there as agricultural crop, first of all. I think there is a possibility for raising revenue through taxation. And I also believe that it should be regulated in terms of ensuring that what people are using is safe and not laced with other kinds of things that could be harmful.
So you'd support legalizing it at the federal level?
Yes, I would, absolutely.
You received an endorsement from Indivisible. This is an organization that I think it's fair to characterize as anti-Trump. And again, you're running in a district that's considered a red district. Do you see the race as winnable?
Absolutely, I do. And I'll tell you, the funny thing is that when I first made the decision to run, I consulted with a number of people who advised me that because this is a 20-point Republican district, and because it went so strongly for Trump in 2016, that this was something that was not winnable. I made the decision to run anyway because in the district I was in, the last 2 times I went to vote, there was no Democratic choice. And that's part of my problem when I say establishment politics. We've not been fielding strong candidates, and in some places no candidates at all. We still don't even have people running for Democrat House seats, even state House seats throughout this district. To a significant degree, the party has abandoned the rural areas, and that's why I made the decision to run. At least there's going to be a choice, and at least there's going to be dialogue about the issues. That said, though, what I'm hearing in the field is that people were upset and unhappy and felt let down by establishment politicians on both sides. And their interest in me, just like in him 2 years ago, was the fact that I'm not establishment.
Because the Cook report rates it the second most Republican district in the state.
Yep.
So you're not put off by that or concerned?
Nope. What I'm hearing in the field, again, is people who, a few things I'm seeing. First of all, tremendous Democratic energy is coming forward. Women's huddles have started. The indivisible groups are doing lots of canvassing. Post-Gazette reported recently that there have been record number of young people who have been registering as well. There's energy happening, and I see that. But the other thing that I'm seeing is that there are Republicans that are coming forward and supporting me as well. I have gotten donations, big donations from Republicans. I've had offers to a Republican matriarch in my own county, well known by everybody, who wants to come and work in our Democratic headquarters visibly. Okay, so that people can see. There is literature for me that is on the desk at a gun shop down outside of Salzburg. Okay, Republican background, NRA, but still sees the value in what we're offering. And I'll tell you, not only is it just anecdotal in terms of what I'm seeing. I was told in the beginning that I shouldn't anticipate any kind of support from the state Dems because they're going to concentrate limited resources in the districts that are most likely to win. They called me 3 weeks ago. They're offering me support now. And I got a phone call 3 weeks ago from the DNC. They hosted a fundraiser for me this last week in Manhattan. Okay, so there are lots of signs coming in based on internal records from internal canvassing that there is movement in this district that wasn't anticipated.
Even among people who are not supporters of President Trump, some people do support him taking a tougher stance on trade with China. There are opponents to that who say it's going to hurt the consumer. Where do you stand?
I believe it's going to hurt the consumer. I also believe it's going to hurt the farmers, and it's going to hurt a number of the businesses. Some will benefit, others are not. And I think that's part of a problem. I also think there's another problem, though, with the tariffs, in that I believe that trade is a strong route for developing international relationships. When we have trade partners and economies in multiple companies are grounded in that relationship, you're going to see less conflict in other areas, less militaristic behavior, and also you can establish conditions for human rights as well in order to be parts of those trade relationships. I think trade is a really good thing.
As you know, many dairy farmers in Pennsylvania are struggling. What, if anything, do you think Congress should be doing to address that?
I think that two things. One is, I think, first of all, antitrust legislation. Again, I mentioned that before. We used to have, in looking at the situation with the dairy farmers from that swath from Venango across over into Center County, again, I mentioned that you've got a significant number of farmers with between like 50 and 200 head that have been all selling their milk to the same contract, Dean's Foods. And when it canceled, everybody was in trouble. There wasn't even going to be a market for them. And it's because we don't have dairy processing. However, through a meeting with Farm Bureau folks over in Clearfield County, I learned that there did used to be lots of small dairy processors that were doing the local farms like this. They got purchased out by big organizations, and they're not buying the same quantities. Down where I'm from, there's a place in a farm, Vale Woods in Crescent, Pennsylvania, that is processing not only the milk from their own 70 head or so, but are also taking milk from 2 other farms. And they're supplying to stores locally and even doing, believe it or not, home delivery. I get milk every Thursday morning. But if we were to make available, first of all, loans, low-interest loans, to either the farms themselves or other entrepreneurs to begin dairy processing, we're reinvesting back in those communities, allowing the farms to diversify and providing other opportunities. So I think antitrust legislation plus investment in small local business. On the opioid epidemic, you said that you would want to sponsor legislation that would give resources to individuals with drug addiction so they can get the help they need. That's not exactly what I said. Congress is in the works on legislation already. Do you think what's being done is enough, or what would you do? I think that we have to have a multi-pronged attack to it. I believe, first of all, I want to be clear, it's the way it was phrased, it sounded like I want to just give checks to opioid addicts. That's not what I'm saying. Please clarify. Would never do that. But I do think that one of the reasons why the opioid death rate is so much higher and growing faster in rural areas than in the urban areas is in part because of lack of access to treatment facilities that are affordable and geographically reasonable for folks. And so I think we do have to invest in treatment programs that are good quality programs, and I think there are a number out there that are not doing what they need to do. So I think that's one thing. Secondly, I also absolutely believe we need to take a look at and deal with what's going on with the pharmaceutical companies and their responsibility in this, as well as physicians that are prescribing in ways that aren't necessary or appropriate. But there's a third thing here. One of the things I know from 20 years of working in human services is that poverty breeds social problems. If you've got someone who just got themselves clean and sober, they're out of treatment, what they need to do is put themselves back to work and be able to support their families and be able to look themselves in the mirror. And that's not happening right now. If you're coming home and you can't find work, or if what you find is irregular, part-time, low-paying, and you're not busy, you're not fulfilled, you're not accomplishing, you're at high risk of relapse, and that's one of our biggest problems. Our communities have got to have economic stability. You said that you grew up in a family that had guns and hunters. Sure did. In it. Do you support any types of gun control measures? I think that there is absolutely room to do some things. I'm particularly concerned about the ready access to military-grade weapons that are designed to kill people. I think that we have some real problems, and that the mass shootings that we have are heavily a function of the fact that we've got so much gun manufacturer money influencing the decisions and policies that are coming out of Congress right now, and their complete resistance to even taking any kind of reasonable measures. There are a number of gun owner and sportsman organizations that have proposed ideas for how to do this, and quite frankly, those are the people I would turn to. It's not, this whole issue has been characterized as gun owners versus people who are elitists and don't get gun culture, and I don't think that's accurate. I think it's been framed by gun manufacturers, and I think there's a lot of misrepresentation. There are lots and lots of people who are sportsmen and gun owners and NRA members in my district who also have ideas for how this can be better managed and better done, and I think those are the people you turn to. Some Democrats are calling for an end to ICE, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. Where do you stand on that? I think that the agency itself is not the issue. This is a bureaucracy. This is a program. It's an office, and they hire people to go and do a job. I think what the problem is the job that they've been told to do. This is an issue of policy, in my opinion.
Deporting unauthorized immigrants.
Is the policy that they're being directed to do. And I think that that's what the problem is. I think this needs to be approached from a policy level rather than throw out the people who are on the ground level doing the job.
If you were a member of Congress, how would you approach illegal immigration?
I think that our problems with immigration come in part from the fact that we have both agriculture and industry that is depending on cheap labor that is working under the table in a lot of instances. And therefore, it is offering incentives for people who are desperate and hungry or living in powerful conflict in other countries to risk their lives to come here. So I think one of the things that needs to be done is that we need to be much more stringent about enforcing the policies for employing people who are not documented, number one. Number two, I think the wall is ridiculous, and I don't support that. I hear rumors that some Canadians have been talking about building a wall to keep the craziness that's happening down here out. I don't think walls are our answer. I do believe, though, in providing a path to legal residency and a path to citizenship that screens people appropriately, lets in people that are interested in working and being part of our economy. I come from immigrants that left starvation in Northern Ireland over close to 200 years ago. And my God, I can't say that people shouldn't be allowed to come here who are facing famine in another country. Provide a path for them to work, make it legal, let them become tax-paying part of our citizens.
We have about a minute left. You said that you support Social Security and Medicare, maintaining them as they are, but in another 20 years or so, there isn't going to be enough money to fully fund them. How would you address that?
I think there's two things we need to do right up front. The first one is that people who are paying into Social Security, you pay up until the point where your income has reached an earned level of $126,000, and after that you don't pay any more for the rest of the year. The first thing I do is get rid of the cap, okay, and I would have people continue to pay in. Secondly, part of what it is that we're paying a portion of what we make. It's a percentage, and other than that, those groups that are making over $126,000 a year, when you have the majority of Americans with a declining relative income overall, you've also got a lower amount of money that's going into Social Security. So if you're raising the wages of people so that people actually are making a living wage, they're also paying more in taxes and they're paying more into Social Security and Medicare. And I think those are the answers I would look to. The last thing I would do, and frankly, I can't think of circumstances under which I would put caps on how much people who need the income to live would receive, or not provide cost of living adjustments, or make them wait until they're 70. We've got way too many people who are waitresses, construction workers, who are not able to do the nurses, able to do the physical jobs that they do past a certain age.
Dr. Susan Boser, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Ann.
We've been talking with Susan Boser, the Democratic candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives, 15th Congressional District. Next, we'll speak with her Republican opponent, Incumbent Glenn Thompson. To find out more about the candidates and watch other interviews, go to wpsu.org/vote18. Today, we're talking with Republican Glenn Thompson, the incumbent in Pennsylvania's new 15th District. Thompson is serving his 5th term in Congress. Before that, he worked for nearly 30 years in health and rehabilitation services. He was recently co-sponsor of workforce training legislation that received bipartisan support and was signed into law by President Trump. Congressman Thompson, thank you so much for coming in to talk with us.
No, Ann, my pleasure. It's great to be back at WPSU.
So the legislation that was just recently signed into law was workforce training and trying to bring technological training to people across the country in towns and communities. And it means more than $1 billion in funding through 2024. What does that translate to in real, actual terms for people in your district?
Well, H.R. 2353 is the bill that's now public law, H.R. 2353, which I was thrilled. I was with the president about a month ago in the Oval Office when he signed it into law. This is about restoring rungs in a ladder of opportunity. You know, our country is facing a tremendous economic prosperity at this point, and it's the most recent Department of Labor statistics have shown that there are 6.9 million jobs that are open and available in our country. And without this legislation, we would continue to have the skills gap. So what this new law does is it makes better access to more effective skills-based education.
So if I'm a person in your district and I need job retraining, or I want to start a new job, I'm just finishing high school, how will it end up applying to me?
Yeah, well, it applies actually in high school. It's actually Americans of all ages. That's the cool part about the Perkins reauthorization. And this reauthorizes the Perkins Act, but it does more than that. It's a transformational piece of legislation. So it's if you're a student in high school and you're looking for a great paying, family sustaining job, something you can enter the workforce, this is a type of training that will help our career and technical education centers like we have at CPI in Center County and many of those throughout the 15th Congressional District. If you're an individual who is underemployed, and unfortunately Center County kind of tops the charts of underemployment, you need as opposed to working 2 and 3 jobs at minimum wage, this will provide you access to get the types of training you'll be able to access through our career links. You'll be able to access this actually working with our schools, with apprenticeship programs, because this expands apprenticeships. You know, if you're unemployed, this is obviously good. If you're someone who's has been living in poverty, maybe for generations, this breaks that cycle of poverty by providing better access to getting the skills. And we're not talking a 4-year degree. We're talking about a competency list. We're talking about certification, a specialization. It's one of the reasons actually people are now leaving their jobs and seeking better jobs, is because they can get that little bit of training to get that better paying job. This
was a bipartisan effort, and that's seen
strongly
as something increasingly rare in Washington these days.
Yeah.
There's a Democratic co-sponsor, but there is not a lot of that cross-party line cooperation. What do you think is behind the acrimony that we're seeing?
Yeah, well, let me just say that what's reported talks about the friction. I think this is an all-star bill, actually, but I do have to, in full transparency, just last week we passed over probably 20 pieces of legislation, and they're all bipartisan.
Sure, there's still bipartisan legislation,
yeah,
but
most of the bills that we pass are under suspension, require a 2/3 vote. That needs Republicans, Democrats. But this one was an all-star because this was voted on 5 times. 2 times in the House, 3 times in the House actually, because I had to manage some amendments that the Senate had made, and twice in the Senate, and then 5 times nobody voted against it. And I think it's because, you know, this is about the power of work, and that's every congressional district, every state for the Senate has employers that can't find qualified and trained employees. We all have families who are struggling, and we all have schools, we have these training opportunities that are out there.
But not all of the legislation that is brought before Congress and not all of the issues receive that type of bipartisan support. And
unanimous, you're right. And so I'm very proud of this piece of legislation.
There seems to be more of a culture of mistrust. Is that something that you see?
I don't know about the mistrust as much as different perspectives. I mean, it's a very diverse nation. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a very good thing, and we should celebrate our diversity. And so we bring different perspectives to the table, and that's where the debate comes in. And then we institute the constitutional processes to, decide what passes and what doesn't. But the large majority of legislation that passes, the large majority.
So you haven't seen a change, though, in the acrimony or the sentiment since you've been in office?
Well, I don't know. I mean, every piece of legislation I introduce, I make bipartisan. I go out and recruit. I'm a Republican, and I go out and actively recruit and find a lead Democrat, Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy. He's from Illinois. He's actually my son and daughter-in-law and 2 little grandsons' congressman in Elgin, Illinois. And Raj came with me. We went to CPI and visit there. So it's the effort that I think that you put into it. Everything I work on, I try to make it bipartisan. I think those are better solutions.
WPSU asked our listeners and viewers callers for questions too, and we received this one from Dennis in State College. His daughter was born with congenital defects and she's had to have surgery 3 times, and he says that the Affordable Care Act has been vital for his daughter's care. And this is Dennis's question: what will you do to maintain the ACA protections and ensure affordable health care for families like mine?
Well, there's unity in Washington to maintain coverage, or trying to do our very best to make individuals that have pre-existing conditions have access to affordable insurance. And so that's among those lists. If I had to rate things, of where the basis support's coming from, that's a unified and has been provision within the whole health insurance debate.
But there's also concern that even if those provisions are covered, if someone's pre-existing condition is covered, that there could be changes in the law that make it more expensive or then give people the option of opting out.
I don't think things are going to be more expensive than what they are right now. The rate of, and as you kindly said in the intro, I spent 28 years serving people facing life-changing disease and disability, and I've watched the escalation of health insurance costs and health care costs. 2 different things, some connection, but still different solutions for both. And and the rate of escalation under the Affordable Care Act has been completely unaffordable. I think you would be surprised to find that, and I haven't looked lately, but at one time, just a couple years ago, a year and a half, 2 years ago, there were more people uninsured in Center County than before the Affordable Care Act. So it is something I work on. My focus has been, some of the things I've led on has been an expansion of telemedicine, which reduces the cost of and the ease of access to care, helps people, and you can't do everything by telemedicine, but you can do quite a bit. And I've had a lot of legislative victories actually in this area. I've kind of led the nation on telemedicine. When it comes for Dennis and his daughter, one of the things I've led on, and it was signed into act here, into law, was a piece of legislation that allows individuals with disabilities, such as Dennis's daughter, to be able to set up their own special needs trust fund, and to do that, which they were prevented from doing that, even with the American Disabilities Act, so that they can manage resources to be able to help their health care needs going forward.
Earlier this year, you spoke at a gun rights rally, and you spoke about the importance of needing to turn to facts and science when making a decision. I'm just going to read one part of what you said. When we stick with science, when we stick with data, then we're able to provide good leadership.
Absolutely.
And on the topic of climate change, scientists are in agreement that human behavior is causing climate change that we're seeing. So as a congressman, how do you think you should respond to that?
I don't think there's 100% consensus on it, but I do believe that climate change occurs. I think that we have, I've always believed that humans, that we as individuals, the human race, have responsibility to protect what God has given us in terms of our environment, and that includes our, certainly our ozone layer, includes our lands, our waters, our streams. And so, it is unfortunate on this particular debate.
There is consensus, though, among scientists that human behavior.
We've made really good progress. That's the sad part. It's almost like, and quite frankly, in my leadership role within the Agriculture Committee, I've been responsible for the largest carbon sinks in the world, and that's a good, healthy forest that takes carbon out of the air. And if that is a leading cause of climate change, it converts it really into topsoil and nutrition, which is good for nutrition for growing things. And so those are the types of things that I work on, that I've led on very successfully. The last Farm Bill and this current Farm Bill that's pending have some of the best provisions for the environment.
Do you think more needs to be done, though?
I think we need to continue to work on things. I think what we need to avoid is weaponizing issues. And unfortunately, climate change has been an issue that's been weaponized on both sides of the aisle. And that's not me. I take offense to that, no matter which direction that's coming in, to advance a political cause or elections based on an issue versus looking for, practical solutions. One of the things here at Penn State, I supported research that looked at the impact of climate change on our Pennsylvania hardwoods. you know, from an ecological perspective, but also an economic perspective. It's a very important part of our economy, and so I've been proud to support research dollars that the university has benefited from that on the question of climate change in that regards.
Sure, there's economic considerations with that as well. On a different topic, you've served as the leader of Boy Scouts. I've seen a lot of the talks that you've given. You talk about the importance of family values, moral values, and a good community structure. Does it bother you that the president, who's now in office and a member of your party, has said things that are pretty offensive to some people?
Anytime people say things that are offensive to others, that obviously bothers me, no matter who that person is, no matter what their party registration is. That's certainly not a direction I would hopefully ever do or to go. And so, yeah, you know, but that's people that are just like every other job, every other position, whether it's government or whether it's media or whatever it is. I mean, you have competency, you have the ability to get things done, and you have personality, and sometimes there's conflicts.
The two don't always go together?
The two don't always go together.
Do you feel like it ever interferes with what your party, or even in bipartisan efforts, what you're trying to get done?
You know, I would have thought perhaps, but when I look at the outcomes, when I look at the Great American Comeback, when I look at unemployment at under 4% and gross domestic product at 4.1%, soon to go probably next quarter, perhaps close to 5%. When I look at 6.9 million jobs that are open, when I look at the layoff rate in our nation today, as we sit here, is 50% of what it's been in the past. You know, all those things are, that's the outcomes. Those are the things that matter quite a bit to almost every American.
I think the other party would argue that some of that credit goes to the previous president.
Absolutely not.
Who inherited the Great Recession,
yeah, no.
10% unemployment rate, and by the time
which only got worse because I was there for 8 years on those policies. And
do you think the unemployment rate got worse under President Obama?
Well, I did. When you look where unemployment went, it was people that struggled, and when you look at the factors, and I don't give, I'm in the legislative branch, so I'll be honest, I'll be maybe the last person to give credit to a president. I look for what are we doing in Congress, and Congress being a combination of the Senate and the House, and I look at the rollback of inefficient, ineffective, unnecessary regulations, not things that are basic to human health. Absolutely important to keep those regulations in place. When I look at the impact of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, of more money in 90% of Americans' checkbooks and checking accounts, you know, you look at the consumer confidence, you just look at all the indicators that came from those two pieces of legislation. I mean, I tried to pass the Career and Technical Education bill under President Obama's leadership, was not able to get it done. So that was a combination of factors.
Republican Congress.
Yeah, well, actually, it was the Senate. And it was timing. When we passed it out of the House last term, the Senate was into campaign mode, and which was not helpful to advancing legislation. You know, but we're getting those things done now. And so I don't look at casting blame. I don't look at taking credit. I think we need to be looking in a measurable way, in an objective way, of just are the lives of American families better today, not casting blame or credit. And that's what's most important.
Another economics-related question on the potential trade war with Europe. In an interview with C-SPAN, you said, "It's a dance, and I'm not going to get wrapped around the axle until the music stops."
That's correct.
But there already is a trade war going on with China right now, and it's starting to concern a lot of people, workers and farmers, and there's a lot of farming community in your district. What do you think needs to be done?
Well, this trade war, we've been being unilaterally attacked by China specifically for some time, for years, for many years. And we've had presidents of both parties who have just done lip service and said they acknowledge that it's a problem, but they'd never take the action to deal with it. And so I think to modernize trade agreements is a good thing. I mean, take, for example, NAFTA. I probably have staff that are not quite as old as what NAFTA is. And so in that time, how much technologies and materials have changed, concerns with intellectual property, you know, and we're on our way. It's probably going to get a different name, but Mexico has come on board with a modernization. One of the few remaining issues on Canada has to do with dairy farmers. Dairy is our #1 segment of our #1 industry, agriculture in Pennsylvania. And Canada has taken actions to become an isolationist and not accept our milk exports. Well, that's the last piece of hanging fruit, so to speak, of what's being negotiated right now. I think Canada is going to come on board with that, and that's going to be good for not just our dairy farmers, but for Pennsylvania's economy.
What about the dairy farmers, the soybean farmers, and others who are going to be hurt in the meantime while things are getting worked out?
Yeah, well, and part of it, that's twofold. I certainly have weighed in with the president many times, personally and through his advisors, pointing out that the easy targets, the soft targets for retaliatory tariffs is agriculture. We saw that in 2009, 2010. President Obama put a tariff on Chinese manufactured tires, and in response, China put a tariff on our poultry, and that hurt our chicken farmers, turkeys, ducks.
We're seeing the same thing
here
now.
In Pennsylvania. Yeah, and part of what we're seeing with impacting the markets, because a lot of agriculture is on the market, traded, futures are purchased, is I think is the media being irresponsible, you know, of even before anything's implemented, if there's just a hint of something that's going to happen, the media's reaction to that causes these speculative markets to just go crazy, and that hurts. But
it's giving the media a lot of credit for having that much.
Well, the media has that much credit in our lives today. We know that. Now, at the same time, I've reinforced with the president that, you know, and most of the farmers I talk to understand this. They want to get to zero tariffs, and I know that's the president's goal, is to get to zero tariffs and allow American producers and manufacturers compete based on our you know, our work ethic, our efficiency, our technology, and I believe in American people. So I think that can occur. The sooner we get some closure on these, the better. I know there's discussions with the European Union. There's discussions, bilateral discussions with various Pacific Rim countries. And I think, you know, China's struggling with these tariffs we're putting. I understand that the emerging middle class there is putting a lot of pressure on the leadership in China to come to the table.
Sure. So traditionally, Republicans have been the party of less spending, smaller government, greater efficiency. But what we're seeing right now is spending is continuing and slated to continue going up. And we got this question from Steve in State College, and he says, when are you going to vote for a proper budget, one that doesn't put the government into greater debt and give a lot more money to the already wealthy?
Well, for Steve in State College, if he lives in State College area, hopefully will be in my congressional district. Most of State College area will not be in a congressional district, but it's a great question, and I appreciate Steve asking that. We, you know, we are working in a responsible way to invest the resources of the American people wisely, and so we have reduced discretionary spending to a level that goes back probably close to the 1990s. The spending that is not checked yet is the mandatory spending. It's spending I never vote on because it's driven by birthdays and the amount of people that wake up and find themselves in poverty circumstances.
Medicare, Medicaid.
Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid. I think we're going to find Medicaid will be coming down as a result of this economy and so many more people that are going back to work. I'm hoping that we'll be able to do that and do some reforms on Medicaid so the people who are truly disabled, the folks that are older adults that are in skilled nursing facilities, that we're able to perhaps do a little better job with what we provide under Medicaid for those folks. Social Security and Medicare is a little harder because the older I get, the more I like birthdays, and you know, we're going to have to show leadership on those and do something, not change anything for anyone who's currently on Medicare and Social Security. That seems to
be the political hot potato. Nobody wants to hold on to it for too long because it does affect people.
I'm ready to move on it. I worked with older adults my entire life. Rehabilitation services. I was licensed as a nursing home administrator. Worked a lot with older adults. And the longer we put this off, the harder it's going to be. We shouldn't change. We should protect Medicare and Social Security for anyone who's currently on it. And anyone who's kind of on a glide path, I would say 5 years out, because you need certainty in planning for your retirement. But for the rest of us, we know that Medicare becomes insolvent by the year, supposedly, it depends on every year the audit, but most recent one I think was around 2025, not that far away. And Social Security is 2035. And so we need to show some leadership on those issues in terms of mandatory spending. But then it's a matter of prioritization. You don't cut everything. You know, I just led the effort to increase our investment over $1 billion into career and technical education training, because helping people get to work, helping people return to work, helping people get great family-sustaining jobs, there's a return on investment on that. So you have to set the right priorities as well.
Pennsylvania and the country are facing an opioid epidemic.
Sure are.
What do you think needs to be done to begin to address it?
Yeah, well, we've begun. My work in acute psychiatric services, I learned a principle that until you admit that you have a problem, you can't deal with it. America admits it has a problem with the opioid crisis. And that's at all levels. I am so proud of our local community groups that have formed, our nonprofits, sometimes parents of children that have been involved and died, but also other people in the community coming together. I'm very proud of my colleagues in Harrisburg at the state capitol. And in Washington, we've invested more than $1 billion. So it's things like, most recently, we're going to be going to conference on a bill. The Senate just passed it 2 days ago. The House had previously passed it, that will provide more money for effective treatment, not the drive-through short-term stuff, but real long-term treatment, but also reducing, preventing the import of harmful drugs and chemicals from countries like China that a lot of it's flowing from. It's about making sure we're doing better by our veterans, that our veterans aren't being treated with just pills. You know, there are some VA doctors, they call them the Skittles doctors, because what they give out are different colored pills, not really effective treatment. Alternative methods of pain management. And there's just a lot of incredibly good research that's going on, because some of us are lucky. We can take a painkiller and we can stop taking it. It manages the pain, we move on. Some people, the first time you take an opioid painkiller, you're addicted for life. And that's an awful thing. And so there is research being done so that we can get more precision medicine to meet people's needs.
You said you support taking hemp off the federal illicit drug list. A lot of states are looking at taking marijuana, either medical marijuana or even recreational marijuana, making it legal in the states, but it's still illegal at the federal level. What do you think of that? Is that something that needs to change?
Yeah, well, let's be clear. Hemp, there's two types of hemp, and the hemp I'm talking about is the hemp they used to make ropes out of. There's not much of a market for hemp rope today, but there is research being done right here at Penn State University on different uses of that plant. Can be used as a replacement for plastic and fiberglass and other uses. I'm not a huge supporter. I think the state actually, I support the use of the derivatives within marijuana for healthcare treatment. I don't think there was a need for separate dispensaries. You know, if something is, I mean, quite frankly, we dispense opioids, we dispense very powerful narcotics, and we do it through pharmacies. And so, so I certainly support the use of the derivatives. And the state chose how to approach this. I'm just not sure that it wasn't not the best possible way to produce that. I do not support the use of recreational marijuana. You know, when I look at the economic impacts, the workforce impacts in places like Colorado, I'm not seeing a lot of good things. And so, but again, that will be that's largely going to be a state decision.
The farm bill that's under consideration, there's two different versions that have been passed by the House and Senate, and it's a major piece of legislation, but it appears that one of the sticking points is whether people who receive food stamps or in the SNAP program should have stricter work requirements, and you support those work requirements. Why is that? Well,
I'm chair of the Nutrition Subcommittee. I'm vice chair of the committee. I helped to put those provisions together. We already have work requirements They've been around for more than a decade.
These would be stricter, and some people.
No, actually, it would take away some of the abusive waivers. I mean, we've got a governor in Pennsylvania who basically have exercised a waiver in almost all of the state of Pennsylvania, and I think that's sad and immoral that it prevents poor, hungry families who are work capable. So we're talking about people who are 18 to 59, do not have a disability, do not have a preschool child at home as a single parent that they have to be responsible for. Those folks are all excluded from these provisions. But what it does is it's sad that we've got a governor currently in Pennsylvania who has blocked those families from getting access.
There's real concern
to skills-based education.
People are not going to be able to meet the bureaucratic requirements, and they're
and here's the bureaucratic quote bureaucratic requirements. One of three things. Number one, you have to be working 20 hours a week. If you're working 20 hours a week, you're underemployed. But if you're working 20 hours a week, you don't have to engage in training that we will pay for, create a training slot.
There could be reasons
and case management, the reasons you're about to jump on to overcome the transportation, the child care, all those different issues. That's just number one. Number two option is to be able to engage in 20 hours of skills-based education, job training. We're going to put $1 billion a year. 20% of that's going to go to our career links, but you could also use that money to go right to a business, do a paid apprenticeship, and to be able to get a job.
I think we're out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there.
There's a third option,
really
though,
quickly.
20, you can, if you live in a place that's just destitute in terms of the economy and jobs, maybe big cities, you can do 20 hours of volunteer time to be eligible. This is about helping families get ultimate food security that only comes from a good family sustaining job.
Congressman Thompson, thank you so much for coming in to talk with us.
My pleasure.
We've been talking with Congressman Glenn Thompson, the Republican candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives, 15th Congressional District. Earlier, we spoke with his Democratic opponent, Susan Boser. To find out more about the candidates and watch other interviews, go to WPSU.org/vote18.